Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I want to pick up where my colleague Grant Robertson left off around Part 4 and really the amount of information that we have around what the effect of this legislative amendment would have. We are reliant on the analysis that the government originally undertook when they implemented the 2-year bright line test. And of course, as those who are familiar with regulatory impact statements will know, usually we're given an indication of the range of options that were canvassed by the government. And actually, to be honest, even when the government's already got an idea of where they're going to go, it's incumbent on officials to provide a range of options, points of comparison, to understand whether or not where you've landed is going to best give effect to your goals. So I went back to the regulatory impact statement, which Grant Robertson touched on a little bit. And you know, what's phenomenal, I think, really is the lack of information in this regulatory impact statement around the alternative options. Now, they said right from the outset in this RIS that doing nothing was not an option because the government already said it was introducing something. So a press statement had gone out, they were introducing a bright line, then it was a matter of doing the policy work. When trying to measure where most of the sales sat in Auckland, and when they were sold, what period, you know, was it within 1 year, 2 year, 3 years? The share of sales within 1 year was roughly 8.4% as a share of sales. I'm assuming that might be as a proportion of the total sale price, because we have information then in the next paragraph down that says between 2009 and 2013, 59% of all new titles were disposed of within a year within Auckland. 59%, huge amount. 29% of new developments in North Auckland were traded within 3 months. But they then go on to talk about the share of sales within 3 and 5 years. That's the only area where we have really any data, though. So when you flick over into the regulatory impact analysis, Mr Chair, and this is important because here we are proposing in this amendment to move from 2 years to 5 years, there was that only 2 options in the regulatory impact statement was option 1, 2-year bright line test, option 2, 3 to 5 year bright line test. 3 to 5 years. So it was an option that was on the table. Interesting, of course, useful for us. Let's delve further and see what level of comparison and detail there was, because we are now in Part 4 taking option 2 from this regulatory impact statement. Now, from the outset, option 1 was the official's preferred option. But where I get confused, Mr Chair, is that it's not entirely clear to me how that decision was made. Because there were 3 policy objectives with the bright line test. A, provide an easier rule for inland revenue to enforce to target short-term speculation, so ease of implementation. B, minimise the number of sales made taxable that were required without an intention of resale. That's difficult to determine. I don't think you can simply say because we've got a greater percentage of sales, therefore we are potentially reaching sales that were purchases that were made without the intention of sale. It's a very arbitrary decision that you make just looking at numbers. And C was minimise compliance costs for taxpayers in order to comply. So those are the 3 tests. Now you'd think that the objective would be to go through option 1 and option 2 and say which best meets those objectives. Well, when you look at the analysis for option 2, which was the 3 to 5 year, which is what we're proposing here, it says in para 29, this option would create a bright line similar to option 1, however with a period for the bright line being longer at potentially 3 or 5 years rather than 2 years. This option has similar impacts as option 1, but with greater effect owing to its longer period. That's a given. It would best meet the objective of creating an easy to enforce rule and would have the greatest positive fiscal and administrative impact. So on at least two of the policy objectives that were set out by IRD, option 2, the 3 to 5 year bright line test, had already received a tick, a clear definitive tick when compared to the preferred option. But here comes the counterpoint, which is the important one. However, this option has the greatest risk of capturing sales that were required without an intention of resale. But Mr Chair, my point is here is there is no data there is no analysis that really quantifies that puts any detail behind that. Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair.
Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for not disturbing my flow. But there's nothing that tells us really that tells us anything beyond just an assumption that because it was longer and there were a greater number of sales, that by default that meant that it would be capturing houses that were purchased without the intention of resale. How do we know? We don't. There was no qualitative analysis around that assumption, and yet that one line was the basis of which the government made a decision to go with option 1, which was a 2-year bright line test. That one line, I'll read it again. However, this option has the greatest risk of capturing sales required without an intention of resale. As a result, this is not Inland Revenue's preferred option. That's it. No data, no analysis. No, I mean, to be fair, I wanted to go just a little bit further because there was a table provided in the regulatory impact statement that again, actually set out on their objective of fiscal objective, economic, administrative compliance, fairness, net impact. It went through both of these options. Now, just to further highlight that I'm not misrepresenting what's happened in this regulatory impact statement, I want to read that for the 3 or 5 year bright line test, they acknowledged that it best met objective A, that it partially met objective C, which is what the 2-year one did as well, but at least met objective B, and that was the one around capturing sales. Again, though, no data. They admitted they had no estimate of the revenue gain that would be made, and that's interesting because if you can't estimate the revenue gain, you can't estimate the number of sales that would fall into the 5-year category, which again highlights that they actually didn't know that it would capture unintended sales. It said this option would have similar lock-in effects to option 1. It would have the greatest impact in reducing the admin costs involved in applying the intention tests, and that it provides the easiest to enforce measure of all the options. In fact, Mr. Chair, I'd have to say that if you didn't have the subjective statement and the bracketed statement around option 1, this is Inland Revenue's preferred option, if you read this document without that bracketed para, then actually you probably would have thought that they would have come down on the 3 to 5 year option, actually, because that's what the evidence and the objective test they set for themselves would tell you would be best to do. I want to come to consultation, because that's what's so fantastic about this amendment. We're putting forward on the table an amendment here to extend the bright line test to 5 years that was actually has already gone through a select committee process of sorts. It's been to a select committee, it's had submissions, which is more than what we've debated in the bill so far. So we did have, not select committee papers, sorry, I should clarify, we did have a Treasury and Inland Revenue released issues paper. We had an issues paper that went out on the bright line test on the 29th of June 2015. There were 14 submissions were received. I know Chris Bishop will know these submissions intimately, so he will be able to tell the House that there were as many submissions promoting a 5-year bright line test as there were supporting a 1-year bright line test. There were only 14 submissions, however, it has to be said, but at least that's more submissions than any of other parts of the bill that we've debated in this House so far. So there was a submission process, and that there was support for extending the bright line test to 5 years. And in fact, by and large, again, those policy objectives that were already, as I set out in the beginning of the regulatory impact statement, most submitters seem to accept were largely achieved by the proposals that were being put forward by Inland Revenue in their issues paper. But, Mr. Chair, I really just want to conclude by again highlighting that the basis on which Inland Revenue and the government settled on a 2-year test had no data, it had no evidence. All we know is the percentage sales within that period. I know of houses in Auckland that have sat empty for more than 2 years simply to accumulate capital gain. They weren't even bought for rental investment properties. They're not even occupied by people who desperately need houses, and they have been that way for more than 2 years. If we want an effective bright line test, we should be sending a clear message with a 5-year provision. That is exactly what Part 4 would do. It would do more to improve affordability and access to the market for first home buyers than anything else in the bill that the government has put forward.